Hey everyone, it's Roland right here, and we're back again with another Exodus Set 6 reveal video. In our last video, we talked about the first of 4 guilds that have been shown in the new Exodus TCG magazine. If you haven't seen that video, definitely go watch that before or after this one. It should be showing up on the screen now. So with that said, let's talk about the second guild Magazine 4 has to offer, and that guild is the Consortium, Machines. The Machine Guild finally makes its debut after multiple sets teasing it, and what we have is a brand new mechanic being introduced with these machines. Admittedly, it doesn't really synergize all that well with existing machines, but going forward I'm sure we'll see it more often. The new mechanic is called Rebuild. It allows machine creatures to rebuild into other machine creatures you own that are visible to you, meaning your hand, field, graveyard, if you somehow reveal your deck, etc. Unlike the Archive Guild, rebuilding is part of card effects and abilities, and not a natural function of the cards themselves. What I mean by that is that a card has to specifically state that it rebuilds in order to trigger this mechanic. Overall, I think the main concept is pretty easy to understand, but there are some finicky parts to it. As you can see on this rules card, machines cannot participate in a rebuild more than once per turn. So for instance, if Machine A rebuilds into Machine B, both Machine A and Machine B can no longer participate in a rebuild for the rest of the turn. That includes any duplicates of Machine A or Machine B you have, because it's by name. That is, unless a card specifically ignores that rule, which we're going to see later on. Another complication comes from energy and attacking. An example is Machine A has 3 energy on it and it resolves an attack. If I then rebuild Machine A into Machine B can technically declare another attack, but the 3 energy from Machine A had already been used this turn and is considered exhausted, meaning it can't contribute any additional damage for Machine B to deal. However, let's say I play a card that gives Machine B 2 energy after it's entered play. In this case, Machine B can then declare the attack, and of the 5 energy equipped to Machine B, only the 2 new energy will actually cause any damage. The rest of the energy is still exhausted, having been used in the original machine's attack on the same pile. Now, while these two concepts may be a little hard to keep track of, remember that you're free to use any tokens or rotations of the card to help keep track of these various different states of the game. Alright, with the mechanic explanation out of the way, we can begin talking about the new creatures and symmetries that this guild brings to us. And so for a first in Exodus history, we now finally have common and uncommon creatures with abilities. We're going to start off with Hedge, Funder of Dreams. This is a common machine creature with a nameless ability that reads, quote, "When this creature enters play, you may rebuild it. If you do, it gains 1 energy. So a pretty simple and minor effect. As we get further in this list, you'll really start to see the value of it. When we're looking at these machine creatures and their ability to rebuild, it's also very important to consider the combos they present. Namely that there are creatures that trigger effects when they have been rebuilt into. In this instance, I consider Hedge as an initiator, since he initiates a rebuild, and the next card we're going to talk about is a Receiver, the kind of creature that you would want to rebuild into from an initiator. That card is going to be Looming Autodros. It's an uncommon machine creature with also a nameless ability. Its ability reads, quote, "During the turn this creature is rebuilt, your machines can't be attacked by creatures that are higher rarity than them." End quote. Now, while I called this card a Receiver, it can technically be an initiator if an other card effect specifically caused it to be, such as a symmetry card that we're going to look at later. This card's effect triggers regardless of whether it is the initiator or the receiver, since technically both creatures involved are considered to be rebuilt. I do, however, primarily see this card as being the receiver, meaning you'll often rebuild your machines into this card in response to something happening, probably your opponent attacking you. I really like this card for a number of reasons, one of which is that it is an alternative to Chains in a similar way that Madness Settles is for Chrono decks. I also like the incentive to run multiple rarities finally coming to a head. I think this really shows how Existence Games has grown as developers. We're finally seeing some of the mechanics that have fallen off over the years rise up, and primarily here we're talking about the rarity mechanic. So ideally you have this card in your hand or graveyard, and then when your opponent goes to attack, you somehow trigger a rebuild into this card to prevent your opponent from wiping your low rarity creatures off. Of course, the tricky part comes when you inevitably fight another player with low rarity creatures. Okay, so we have one more common creature to talk about, and that's Unstable Chroniker. This is a common machine with a nameless ability that reads, quote, when this creature enters play, you may rebuild it. If you do, move one energy in play to another creature or pile on the same side of the field, end quote. Once again, a pretty simple but weak ability for a common creature, which makes total sense. It's not bad, it's definitely usable since machines will likely be a multi-rarity deck type, and I totally see players having to run one copy of their machine creatures in their deck instead of two copies. You can use this creature to snipe one energy creatures on your opponent's side of the field, but the downside is that there has to be another target for you to move the energy into, which isn't always going to be an option. Regardless, it's what you'd expect from a common, and will most likely be used in any kind of draft situation, and just multi-rarity decks in general. So let's now move to take a look at a rare creature. We have Insatiable Abysm. This is a rare machine with the ability Scrapyard Gorge. It reads, quote, when this creature battles and survives, you may rebuild it. If you do, it regains the energy it lost during that battle, end quote. So while this is probably one of my favorite machines shown, the potential of this card is really quite strong, and it allows you to get some really favorable trades against your opponent to better control the board. It also can scare your opponent from attacking this creature, since they have to essentially kill it in one shot or risk letting it rebuild to full energy and trigger any rebuild effects it might hit, like Looming Autodros. Offensively, this card is good, especially the more energy it has, since it will allow you to wipe off lower energy creatures on your opponent's side of the field for free. If you can rebuild this into something that gains even more energy, you can declare a second attack with that non-exhausted energy. And what better target to rebuild into than the first secret rare shown in this set, Colossal Contrivance. This is a secret rare machine behemoth creature. It has the ability Evolutionary Uproar, which reads, quote, when this creature enters play, it gains one energy for each rarity among machines, either on your field or in your graveyard, end quote. So holy cow, this creature is an absolute beast, literally and figuratively. By far one of the strongest energy gain card effects we've seen, considering how solid the lower rarity machines look to be. The fact that this card triggers whenever it's put into play, meaning both by summoning and by being rebuilt into as a receiver, and the fact that it looks at both the field and grave for different rarities, makes it so this card can consistently be your main source of energy gain. You probably don't even need cards like Leech or Glimpse to necessarily get ahead of your opponent's energy destruction. This guy can single-handedly generate anywhere from 4 to 8 energy a turn, and if anything, this is the Machine Guild's version of Chief Bandit. Now I do have two examples to give you an idea of how nuts he is. Example 1 is you start the game with Hedge and this card in your hand. Now, one thing to note is I think machines will have a weak opening turn, because in general, to rebuild into a machine, you ideally want to rebuild into a machine from your graveyard and not from your hand, since rebuilding from your graveyard is like gaining a free ability, whereas rebuilding from your hand requires that you essentially spend a card to do so. So when you start the game and have no creatures in your graveyard to rebuild into, machines kind of struggle a little bit there. But regardless, you play Hedge on a pile of 3, and that causes Hedge to rebuild into Colossal Contrivance in your hand. Hedge will go to grave, and Colossal will enter play. Colossal gains 1 energy from Hedge's effect, and 2 energy from its own effect, meaning in turn 1, you have 6 energy and little effort. Example 2 is maybe a few turns later from example 1. You have a Hedge and Colossal in your graveyard with an Insatiable Abysm in play on a pile of 3 energy. Your opponent has a creature in play with 2 energy, and your Abysm attacks the opponent's creature and destroys it. It then activates its effect, rebuilding into your Colossal Contrivance from your graveyard. It'll regain the 2 energy that it lost in battle due to Abysm's effect, and then Colossal's effect triggers, and it finds 3 different rarities among machines you own: itself, Hedge, and Abysm, therefore granting it 3 energy. It now has a total of 6 energy under it. Now, there's a ruling here that I'm curious about that'll determine if Colossal then attacks, how much damage would it swing for. There's an argument to be made that it will attack and swing for 5 because the 2 energy that was returned from Abysm is considered new, and therefore it's not exhausted, and so Colossal would swing for 5 total. Or there's an argument to be made that Colossal will only swing for 3 energy because the 2 energy returned to Colossal from Abysm's effect has technically been in play already and is considered exhausted. Regardless, it's still really strong, and Colossal could attack if it wanted to, but even if it didn't, you just gained 3 energy while destroying your opponent's creature that had 2 energy on it. All of this happened without the use of a single Symmetry card. Now regardless, this is hands down a staple for the Machine Guild, without question, and it's awesome to see a secret rare not only look this cool, but also be an integral part of the identity to this guild's mechanic. And well, that's all the creatures we know about for the Consortium Guild. There was one more that was kind of teased in the magazine, but pretty much the entire card was blocked off, so I think it's prudent to just move on to the 2 symmetries that were shown on the Consortium Guild page. The first symmetry I'll talk about doesn't necessarily synergize with anything the machines are doing, and that card is called Sands of the Broken Timepiece. It's a rare symmetry that reads, quote, target 1 symmetry in play and return it to the owner's hand. If you have less life points than your opponent, that opponent can't play cards of that name for the rest of the turn. End quote. This card is absolutely insane. This is Crystal Cove 2.0, Crystal Cove on steroids. There are certainly downsides with this card in comparison to Crystal Cove, such as the fact that it doesn't cause your opponent to forcibly use the symmetry at an awkward time, like when Crystal Cove freezes a vortex or unsummon, but the upsides to this card are pretty nuts. First, you can target your own symmetries, meaning if you have a frozen symmetry in play by your opponent's Crystal Cove, you can return it back to your hand to use it immediately. But then add on to the fact that regardless of whether or not you sent your symmetry or your opponent's symmetry to a hand, your opponent just can't play that symmetry anymore. You could find yourself with an important symmetry buried in an effects stack. So at the very bottom of a stack, maybe you played a card, your opponent responded, and now you need that card to be back on top. You can use this card to return that symmetry to your hand so you can play it on top of the stack again. This card may not be a staple in every deck, especially with how well-rounded the new guilds seem to be shaping up, but we will 100% definitely see this card a lot. I mean, just imagine a deck with 2 Crystal Coves, 2 Forerunners, and 2 of these. It's absolute madness, and when you're talking about beatdown decks, this is a huge buff to beatdown control. And well, I guess it's time to just wrap up with the final consortium card to talk about, and that is Canyon of Secrets. It's also a rare symmetry and has an effect that reads, quote, target one of your machines in play and rebuild it, even if it and the rebuild target have already been rebuilt this turn, end quote. So this card is most likely a staple in all machine decks. The ability to hand trick a rebuild at any given moment of the game, including with creatures that have already been rebuilt that turn, is super duper strong. Imagine those examples I mentioned before. You could have Abysm attack, rebuild into Colossal Contrivance, then Colossal attacks, then use Canyon of Secrets to rebuild Colossal into another Colossal or something else that's just as good. I mean, there's just not much more to say. I think this card is super good and a must-have in the deck. I love what it will allow machines to do. Once again, when your opponent goes to attack, you can play this to trigger a rebuild into Looming Autodros, and now your opponent just can't attack you. It's a great card. Hands down a great card, and I look forward so much to using this for more high skill play with machine decks. And that's another guild down, guys. Honestly, I can say the Consortium is right up my alley. Everything about this guild and how it plays is the kind of style I want to play the game. And while I still feel that Archive is the most unique and fascinating mechanic to come to Exodus, this guild and its mechanic just speak to me on a whole different level. I'm so excited to play this, and I really hope you enjoyed the video and that I was able to clearly explain all the cards and the mechanic used. There's still 2 more guilds to cover, so be sure to subscribe to the channel to get notified of when those will go live. This has been Roland Wright, everyone. Have a good one.